Hi, everyone. This is Futures for Europe Conversations, a series of dialogues with professionals from all over the world who engage with work that is future sensitive. I'm Bianca Dragomir, and together I'll be talking to Peter Bishop, founder of Teach the Future. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Bianca. Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for being my first guest, if I am to be honest. And I feel that you are the right choice for more than one reason. And I think you will help me explore and demystify some of the concepts surrounding futures studies and futures education. I will jump right into it with my first question. I would like you to take me back to when you started pursuing this field of future studies. I want to understand a bit the spirit of those times in the USA, in the world, and what seemed to you like a good idea to embark on this.
Wow, that's a great question because, people their favorite subject is to talk about themselves. So I thank you for starting with that question. I have a special time in life that I've talked about, and that is when we kind of pop out of our upbringing. We all grow up, most of us at least, in families and communities, in churches or schools that are all fairly, ordinary and well put together. When we leave those, we go to college or the military or go to work, we find a world, a whole world out there that we probably didn't know much about. And I delayed my popping out right after high school because I went into the Catholic seminary at that time, and they put us away for a while. So I was really in my early 20s when I came out of the seminary and found a world in 1968, 1969 in the United States that was literally on fire. I mean, I just listened to a podcast about 1968 and all the things that were happening then, the Vietnam protests and really violent responses by police. The beginning, the civil rights movement was in full swing. And the environmental movement was just getting started, not quite so violently, but it was certainly a significant time. And I was going to be a physicist. Probably a good idea that I'm not, because I don't think I was going to do very well. And I said, this is really interesting. Where did all this change come from? Because when I left the world, more or less, to go in the seminary in 1962, things were pretty settled. We were going along. We hadn't had the Kennedy assassination. We hadn't had the Cuban Missile Crisis. We hadn't had the Beatles. So everything was pretty regular. And then all of a sudden, it was like time travel. I popped into a different world. So I decided to switch to sociology and study social change, and which I did. I got my degree in sociology, graduated in 1974. Unfortunately, I found out that sociologists, because of a quirk of the academic world, don't really study long-term social change because it takes too long. They don't get their publications out in time. They don't get their dissertations done. You have a certain time limit to get tenure at a university. So they tend to do what's called cross-sectional research, which is research into the structures of societies and organizations, but not the longitudinal research. So if you have a piece of bread, you can cut it crossways and have it, or you can cut it long ways. Well, they don't do the long ways. So I was teaching a course in sociology called Social Problems, which were issues. I had no idea that there was a future to these things. And I was recruited, however, into the University of Houston, a branch campus there. And I met with the dean. And I said, as part of my interview process, I said, what's this thing called Studies of the Future in the catalog? I never heard of that. And he said, well, we study the past, don't we? I said, yes. Why can't we study the future? Well, I was a scientific sociologist at that time. I didn't think you could study things that didn't exist, for instance. And that seemed, but I wanted the job, which I got the job to go there and teach statistics and research methods, which I did for a number of years. But I hung out with the faculty there. It was the first degree ever created in the world called Studies of the Future, a Master of Science degree. And they were good people. And then I realized, it took me a couple of years. I should have been quicker on the draw here. Future, social change, future. This is what I've been looking for. I just basically stumbled on it. And I said, you think I could teach one of these courses? They never taught me how to think about the future or do forecasting or planning in sociology school. And they said, sure, why don't you run the program? Okay, in the academic world, the newest guy, has to kind of meet with the dean and do all that kind of thing. It's all responsibility and no authority, but that was fine. They were good people and we worked together. And I started right away developing the curriculum that became the Houston Foresight Framework Method, and ran that program for many, many years. So that's the origin story of both Houston and myself and Teach the Future, because when I retired in 2013, I said, I've been talking to adults my whole professional life about the future and public speeches and graduate schools and all around the world, and nobody's talking to young people. So that's my job at Teach the Future.
Okay. Before we go a bit in more depth about Teach the Future, one more question related to the beginnings. It seems that these are the beginnings of future studies entering into the academic realm. But I assume I know in the military and in the market and marketing, there was already this spark that you can create scenarios or you can prepare for the future. Did that influence what happened on the market, influence the academic world in any way?
Well, I didn't invent the field by any means. In fact, I have longer than this podcast, a presentation on where the concept of the future came from. And it stretches way back into the 18th century. People were starting to talk about the future and write about it as a function of the Industrial Revolution and the change that created. Science fiction appeared in the 19th century, and then professional forecasting and planning appeared in the 20th century, some of it even before World War II. After the war, the futurists in Europe, like Pollack and the Dutch futurist and Robert Jungk in Austria, Michel Godet and others were beginning to think about the future, and largely, again, as the kind of trying to come to grips with the war and with that degree of change. And then the United States, which was not affected physically by the war, 𝐼𝐻 Kahn was talking about the scenarios of nuclear war in the 1950s. And Rachel Carson wrote her book, Silent Spring, which was a scenario of the outcome of pesticides on the environment in 1962. And so the future in the United States, at least, and around the world in Europe, was becoming a big topic. I read Alvin Toffler's Future Shock and the Club of Rome study in 1973 on the limits to growth. So it was in the water, it was in the air. And in fact, that's why the world, in the US, we created the World Future Society in 1967. I wasn't involved then. And in Europe, in Paris, they created the World Future Studies Federation in 1971. So the change was in the air. Everybody was talking about it. People were writing about it. And so it was a brilliant move for Dr. Cannon, the dean of that school, to create the first degree in 1975. It was pretty obvious. Well, everybody's talking about this stuff. Why don't we teach it in school and prepare people to work professionally as career professionals in future studies?
Fair enough. As you mentioned, you've been heading this master's program in foresight at the University of Houston. You founded Teach the Future. Curricula and programs aside, what is your pitch or your proposition or your invitation to people and young people especially on how to engage meaningfully with the future? How do you seduce them that this is important?
When you ask the question, that's a great question. Why is it not? It's like we're on a journey and you don't want to know where we're going. You don't want to know what we'll see or what not will, but what could happen to us. I mean, teachers prepare students for a field trip. They're going to go to a museum or to a park or to a scientific establishment, and the teacher will tell them, okay, we're going to get on the bus, and at 10 o'clock, we're going to be at this place, and you're going to see this, and you're going to see that. Do they predict exactly what's going to happen on the field trip? The bus gets a flat tire, or they find something that's really amazing, or the museum is closed. There's all those contingencies, but the teacher prepares the students for what they're going to be prepared for. That's just prudence. That's just not even good teaching. When a family takes a vacation, they tell their kids, if they're old enough, here's where we're going to the beach, and this is what we're going to do. And everybody does that. Why we don't teach that in school when we're preparing young people to live a full life, a full adult and successful and vibrant life, give them some sense of where they're headed. So I have a slide actually, in which has two pictures. One is a picture of students on a train platform with suitcases and stuff. And I said, these students know where they're going. And then I show a picture of a science class. And I say, these students don't. And why are we not giving them a sense? Can we predict exactly what's going to happen? Of course not. Can we give them some sense, however, of the things that could happen, the things we expect to happen, and the tools to be able to do that for themselves? Absolutely. The amazing part of it is that future studies has to make a case for teaching it. History doesn't have to make that case. The only case that I've heard is unless we study the past, we are bound to repeat the mistakes. Well, let me tell you, we're doing a lot of study of the past, which in fact we should.
We're still making mistakes.
Study all about change, but we still make them same mistakes over and over again. So it's not really working. But if you had a historian on your podcast, would you say, why are you teaching history? What good does it do for students? Well, I think history is extremely important for the study of change, for our history, our tradition, where we have come from, and indeed to learn from if we can. But we should think of think of change as a three-part play. It's a past, a present, and a future. It's like and unfortunately in school and in a lot of life, we leave the theater after Act 2. Oh, the present. Okay, that we're done. No, we're not done. We have a whole future ahead of us. Now, do we have photographs of that future? No. Or documents? No. But we have an imagination. We have data. We have trends, and we have expectations and visions and hopes and desires. We should have students be talking about all of that stuff.
In fact, when I asked you, I mean, it's not, of course, a justification of why would you do that, but rather how you warmly invite them in a way that they accept, catching their attention, especially since, and this is a bit of a nuance different from what you just mentioned, you're not inviting them to plan ahead for a trip or for a vacation. You're inviting them to open their minds and their availability to 20 years time sometimes in the future, or 10
Yes.
years time. So that invitation I'm interested in. Do they have the courage initially to accept that it's possible to play around with ideas of potential futures, even if they are far away from us? It's not next week or next month.
That's very interesting. You're assuming that students are genetically or naturally narrow, that they have a hard time. They jump on it right away. There is no need to say, let's talk about the future. Oh yeah, let's talk about the future. Are any of their other teachers giving them the opportunity to have that discussion? No, very few, if any. And so they are eager, they jump on this, they love this topic. And so you don't have to open their minds are open. And schools, unfortunately, given the narrow topics that we're teaching, the curriculum that we're teaching, we do not allow them to exercise their imagination, their judgment. They do not allow them to handle complex and difficult issues appropriate for their age. Rather, we're teaching them the facts of the textbook. We step our way through the curriculum year after year, class after class. So when we say, let's talk about something important that is important for your life, there's no need for further discussion. They're ready to do it right away.
Okay. What makes a person future illiterate versus a person who is future literate? A bit crack open this term that sounds quite fancy, future literate, and see what it's made of.
There are it's a complex
Mm-hmm.
concept, so various
Mm-hmm.
people will have different ideas about it. We do have a technical scale called the Futures Consciousness Scale, developed by our colleagues in Finland, and I can talk about that too. But my own sense is that before we talk about the future, we should talk about change and how change occurs, where it comes from, both in the past and in the present and in the future. We have a discipline that's supposed to be about change, which we call history, what we learn in school. Frankly, historians also do more, as sociologists do, cross-sectional discussion of the past, a person or a movement or an event, and they focus on that. And their background is that they don't really do a longitudinal study of change. So I would say that history is the study of differences. The life was different back then, but where it all came from and how it, what's the story? What's the history? It should be his story. And there's not as much story. There's a story about a time and a place and people there, and that's important. I'm not discounting that, but they don't really study the whole change. So a futures literate person sees the continuity of change over time. We have another field that studies current affairs, which would be political science or journalism or whatever are studying and focusing on current affairs. But again, some of it is about where it's come from, but not very much. And certainly none of it is about where it's going. So a futures literate person sees their world in a context of historical change and future possibilities. That's, I just made that up. But you really challenge, because we have the scale and we have dimensions of that, which is very academic and very well researched and stuff. But if one thing I try and do is give people the context that our time, unique though it is also a chapter in a long story that has more chapters yet to come. We know we're the result of the past, and we celebrate or bemoan the fact that we have this world we have today. But this world it's not the end. We're not done. And we should, in fact, we always think of future studies as a professional discipline that people use for forecasting and planning and preparing, anticipation, all that. Why don't we study it in the humanities? Why don't we study it as a product of human imagination? History is in the humanities. You know, business people don't use much history. Military people don't use much. They study it. They should, of course. But history is not considered an instrumental. It's there for its own sake. We should also, not instead of, but we should also study the future simply as a way of human. We have a capacity to imagine and anticipate the future. Let's celebrate that and talk about that simply as a human quality, whether or not it's going to raise, profitability of a business or get more voters for an election. Just thinking about the future should be as important as thinking about the past. We're not looking for more, we're just looking for more or less equal, because the future is a human enterprise and we should be talking about it with young people.
No, that does the job for me of demystifying it a bit, because I think if you present it as a heightened awareness of how change occurs, right, it's already a bit more palpable. When you say it's future literacy, it sounds already placed in a territory where you have to reach further.
I always begin with change, because there are three acts. It's the past, the present, and the future. And frankly, I was quite interested in history as a student myself and learned a lot about it. Living in a seminary, that was an historical period, frankly, and it was a kind of an experiential past. But we begin with change. And if you didn't even mention the future, understanding change, where we've come from and where we're headed, would seem to me one of the things that we should have top of mind as we build our lives, as build our families, select and enter into careers. Where is this going? And no one feels like you can do that in a rigorous and academic and useful and effective way. And now we've figured out how to do that, and we should be doing that in school.
Because you mentioned in school, most of the, training programs or faculty programs, of course, are addressing 19, 20-year-olds and older, right? Especially in the corporate world or management and strategic decision makers. But you don't seem to believe, I'm sure you believe, that you should start really young.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, what does it mean really young? And what kind of seeds do children have in them that if you wet them the right way, they will gain this awareness that you are aiming for?
let me start with a colleague of mine in a country very close to yours in Hungary, in Budapest. Tamás Gaspar is the head of our hub in Hungary. And I was there a few months ago. He invited me to his class, a lesson that he taught in kindergarten. 5 and 6-year-olds, 5 and 6-year-olds. It was marvelous. A colleague of his, and he plays the guitar. They sing songs. She draws on a whiteboard, little drawings, and the students talk about them. And they're teaching fundamental concepts. They're teaching about alternatives. They're teaching about surprise. They're teaching about the use of their imagination. And the kids are delighted with this. It was a most heartwarming experience. So how young? Okay, let me just say 6 years old. But I mean, you're not teaching the forecasting, you're not doing trend analysis and all of that. But the reason that we talk about it before we get out of high school and certainly or early college is that that's where our basic assumptions about change are formed. I have a part of my presentation is that we've learned about the future, even though teachers and schools never mention the word. In history, we learned about change because it seemed to be an inevitable sequence of events. A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. And we're not talking about the contingencies. We're not talking about what could have happened in the past. That's not in the textbook. What we're talking about is what did happen in the past. So we leave here and say, okay, well, that's the past. Therefore, it's just kind of one step after the other, one thing after the other. And so the future is going to be, oh, here's the future, one step after the other. So we almost think of the future as an inevitable series of events. Well, that's not futures literate. That is, that's the other place where we learn about the future is in science class. In science class, the future is predictable. In physical science, you calculate the period of the pendulum. You calculate how long the ice cube is going to melt in the calorimeter and things like that. And you get an A and you go on to college. Well, we leave school with the wrong impression that the future is already determined pretty much, and that we can predict it. Wrong in both cases. So we need to get this idea of contingency and uncertainty and using your judgment into schools, and students are never allowed, their curriculum and their pedagogy does not allow them to make a decision between two valid answers to a question. Education, in order to be accessible, has chosen questions that have simple answers. The answers are in the textbook. And that I'm characterizing. There are a lot of teachers that don't just do that, but most do, I would say still. And so once you learn how to get through school is memorize the textbook, give back the answer on the test, be telling you get to adult life. When have you actually considered a real question that there is no one answer to? There are 3 or 4 valid answers. How do you get to a solution to a problem where there are multiple criteria and multiple reasons for choosing one solution over another? When do you exercise that judgment? Now, I believe that you and I and people that I know have figured that out. We're doing it as adults. Why don't we introduce that concept to students early on? Well, we don't because it's hard to teach and it's hard to grade and hard to assess. So we've taken the easy path in education. Not that teaching is an easy profession by any means, but we have chosen a curriculum and a learning objectives that are easier to teach because we can just tell them what the answers are, and easier to assess because we can give them tests and grades and all this high stakes testing, and that is a function of that particular period. So we're not preparing them for adult life, particularly in a complicated world. When's the last time a real adult in any kind of a profession had one answer, one right answer, and everything else is wrong? I'm going to give a speech tomorrow to a group called the World Affairs Council in California here, and I'm making the judgment that the polarization we're experiencing in societies today is a function of the fact that we have not, partially at least, we have not given students the opportunity to listen to alternatives, consider alternatives, make a decision about alternatives, but realize their decision is an uncertain decision. It's based upon their judgment. It's not right or wrong, but what we have today are people basically shouting at each other their right answers and not very much discussion and deliberation, trying to assess which are not which are right or wrong, but which are better and worse, and which ones we choose. So we want students to be leaders. We want students to have agency. We want them to influence their future. When in their young life do we give them the chance to do that? I mean, their parents are telling them what to do. Their teachers are telling them what to do. In many ways, their peers are telling them what to do, and social media is telling them what to do. When do they say, okay, I'm going to influence and create change? Their lives are constrained. And so we get out and they graduate from whatever, high school, college, whatever. And all of a sudden we say, well, now you be a leader. Now you need to take initiative. You need to have agency. When in the world did they ever teach them how to do that or give them the opportunity to practice it? We did. And so, I mean, this is more than just future studies. This is a wholesale rethinking of the purpose of education. It is not transmitting information anymore. And now with AI coming along, and they say, we need to teach students are using it. They get a piece of, if they need a fact, if they need information, they get it immediately, right from search or now from AI. But they're not ever asked to say, now what are you going to do with that? What's the skill involved in communicating, in understanding, in evaluating, in discerning? Those are skills. We're not teaching skills. We teach literacy. We teach reading, writing, to some extent calculation. But after that, it's textbook facts, one after the other. So and Futures is a great way to start teaching this stuff, which should be taught in every subject, because there is no textbook. We had a group of teachers in Istanbul who started teaching Futures in the 5th grade and the 9th grade in elementary and high school. And at the end of the semester, we asked the students, what do you think of that class? And they said it was great. And we had a chance to talk about real things. We were engaged. That's adult language, but they liked it. Teachers didn't like it. And we said, why not? What's the problem? Well, when the student said, what do you think is going to happen? They didn't have an answer. Because in every other subject, and they came from traditional subjects of science and math and history and whatever, they had an answer to that question. And it was my mistake in preparing them to teach Futures to tell them, you do not have an answer to that question. Your answer to that question is, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's try and figure it out together. Now we're all of a sudden shift out of the world of facts into the world of skills. And it is preparing students with skills to live in the future that future studies is about. And Futures is great, as I say, because there are no future facts. I mean, Bertrand de Juvenal said that in The Art of Conjecture in the 1950s, and there are no future facts, but we do have processes and skills to be able to anticipate and influence the future, and that's what we should be teaching students.
Well, if you put it that way, then no matter how you call it, it becomes like you create a playground for different skills to be, exactly, I don't know, exercised.
Well, it's interesting that it's interesting you use the metaphor of the playground, because students are learning skills in school. They're learning skills in sports. They're learning skills in the theater or the orchestra. If they have a student council or some kind of leadership program, they're learning leadership skills there, but they never learn them in the classroom. The classroom is kind of an isolated, hyper-factual environment that all you can study is science and facts and things like that. When in the classroom are they asked? Maybe in literature class, if it's a good teacher of literature, they will be using their imagination and imagining things. But outside that, in the fact-based subjects, they're not learning skills.
Well, we shared when we met in Bucharest a few months ago that I feel that the closest to what you're describing was my academic debate world, in the sense that was a similar kind of playground where we really learn to, I don't know, to think about causalities, about implications of different phenomena. So I think these two domains could be friends, in fact, or exactly. One to be a...
There is no perfect list of skills. If a school or a teacher were to say, I am going to focus on skills, I don't care what the skills are, students will be more engaged and they will be more active because they will be practicing. How does a coach teach a young person to play football? You show them the ball, you show them the rules, and within 20 minutes, you're out on the pitch practicing, doing, acting, and then getting feedback and trying this and trying that. That's the way we learn skills. We do not do that inside the classroom, inside the academic classroom, unfortunately, in almost any country.
Now, because I feel that the way the future consciousness scale for adolescents came up, I suppose, and I would ask you if my intuition is right, you want to be able to, I don't know, convince or extend this invitation to adults and to teachers and to the heads of programs that these skills are to some extent measurable or accessible. Now let's unpack a bit. What is this future consciousness scale, and how would it help your efforts in promoting futures education or in measuring it?
We get the question all the time, what good is it? Why teach the future? My first response is, why do we teach the past? They never asked them that. We're always going to teach anything. And it's, it's tradition, it's custom. We have to learn history, and we should learn history. I'm not just saying we shouldn't, but they're not asked to come up with a historical thinking scale or justify why we're. So number one, I get a little bit irritated that we're being asked to do that and our colleagues in history are not. But that aside, the consciousness scale has 5 different dimensions, and each of those, I believe, are valuable for people to live in a complex world full of change. First of all, thinking long-term, thinking systemically, as not just the events of the future will be the result of individual effort or my effort, but the systems involved, the large-scale systems, seeing those systems, seeing how they work, seeing how we might change them. Being open to alternatives. Again, history doesn't have any alternatives in it. Science doesn't have any alternatives in it. It's really, this is the truth, and here's what you learn, and it's done. And the future is all full of alternatives, alternative scenarios, alternative possibilities, alternative values, and things like that. Giving students, the 4th dimension is agency, giving students the opportunity to affect their future, to influence their future in even tiny ways. A little bit of practice. I mean, you're not going to go to the World Cup as a high school soccer player, but you are going to play against, with your peers and against your peers, and you're going to learn skills in the process. So we're not asking them to solve climate change. We're asking them to influence, what were you going to do here? What should the school do? I mean, to me, one of the ideals is giving students agency in their own schools and in their own classes. You talk to teachers about that or principals about that, and they run away in horror. Oh my gosh, I can't let students have that kind of. Well, why not? I mean, we want them to grow up to be influential and leaders. Why not give them the chance to start practicing some of those skills and teach them, not just throw open, say, okay, you make the class. No, we're, just like a coach doesn't say, okay, now I'm going to go away and you come back in three days and you're going to know how to play football. No, we're going to lead through a series of activities. So agency is another, as a final one, is the 4th one. And then there's the last one is called concern for others, which actually, when I first came across the scale and talked to the researchers in Finland about that, why did you put that in? And they said it's in the literature that unless you have, you are part of some kind of a larger sense of people, and you care for others and how this affects them, then you're really not conscious of the future. So I accept that. That's the 5th one. So long-term thinking, systemic thinking, openness to alternatives, agency, and concern for others. Now tell me, anybody who says, no, we shouldn't waste time. I'll use the word waste. We shouldn't waste time teaching students those things. They don't need any of those things to be successful adults. They need those things to be successful students in an open and vibrant and learning environment. They should be practicing those things all the time, not even waiting until they're 25 years old and they got out of school. So the futures consciousness scale, it is not the only way to teach futures literacy, but it is a way that responds to the, what shall I say, the empirical desire for the desire for empirical results. So here's a scale, and all it is, it's just asking students questions to agree, statements to agree with or not. And it's been validated statistically, published in peer-reviewed journals, all of that stuff. Those 5 things I think are marvelous. If I had a school that was focusing on those 5 things only and teaching some facts in that context, then I think it would be great.
It would be. A storm has just started here. I need to close it more
Please,
carefully because
go right
it's
ahead.
bumping into my.
Sure.
Well, speaking of change, it literally started in the middle of your sentence, and then 1 minute later is mayhem outside.
Okay. Speaking of contingencies and
exactly.
unexpected events.
I was wondering if about this following thing. The fact that you are engaging with students to be able to imagine futures with all the benefits that you mentioned earlier is wonderful. At the same time, you're not the only, I mean, not you're not the only young, young people and individuals themselves are not the only one imagining futures. The media does it for us, politicians that do it, movies, literature, scientists, and so on. So there are already on offer different kinds of images about potential futures. And I wonder whether you feel some of them are so pervasive and so potent that color the vision and the perception of young people today. Are there some narratives about futures that you feel are, you know, leading the, like in the music charts, they are at the top and they are influencing and coloring the vision of young people in very potent ways?
Let me go back to the two misimpressions that we acquire in school, and one of those is that the future is pretty well determined already, and you don't have much to say about it. You can go overboard and say I can have any future I want. Well, that's not true either, but you can have influence on the future, and we are not teaching that. Secondly, that the future is predictable. You have, I mean, let me give you the image that we talk about, 2 images that we talk about. First of all, when I begin the discussion of change, I say change comes from 2 sources, 2 gigantic sources. One is the world, which happens to us, and the other is our own actions, where we influence the world. It's a reciprocal relationship. Impact, we call it inbound change, and influence, we call it outbound change. The metaphor that we're using for inbound change, for what's happening in the world, is a road or a river. It's fixed. The road has an end, it has a destination. And when people start thinking about the future, the first thing they want to know is, where does it end? Where does the road go? The metaphor we should be using, and it's a river metaphor, is not a river, but a river delta. A river has a single pass. It has banks. The water came down a particular passage. It has a single present, the banks that it's in. But if the river is going into the sea, into the Mediterranean or the Gulf of Mexico or the Indian Ocean, it branches out into multiple channels, it is unpredictable. You can choose a channel, maybe if the current is modest enough, you're in a canoe, you can paddle to one of those. Or if the current is strong, you will be whisked down one of those that you don't have. There's a difference. That's the metaphor we should be teaching students, that the future is a set of different futures, not just one. And that's an assumption that we need to correct. On the other side, the outbound future is that if you want to influence the future, you have to do systematic plans, rigid schedules, you have to have a budget, you have to have an organization. It's not like that. It's not like building a building or building a road. If you're going to build a road, you better have a budget, you better have the materials, you better have people who know how to do that. But that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is like growing a garden. Or now we have very young children in our family, and it's like raising a child. It's so much like raising a child. If we want to create change in the world, which is a living organism to some extent, full of living organisms, we can have a plan. We should have a plan. We should have a goal, but we should be ready to negotiate goal and the process with the organism. And so anybody who's had children realizes that plans are necessary, but they are not complete, because the little child says no, or has a fit, or wants to do something else, and all of that. And I think we need to respect that. And we need to respect the fact that some parts of the world don't want what we have to offer, and some parts do. I mean, people in advertising and sales know that they have to negotiate. They can't just tell the customer, this is what you want, this is what you need. They won't take that. They have to offer something. So it's a negotiation. So we should think about creating outbound change as working with the world, not dominating it and making it happen. So those are two, I think, major misimpressions that we come out of school with, that the future is a road with a destination, and that we need a plan, like building a building, like a blueprint. We don't either. Those give us the wrong idea about how to anticipate uncertain change and how to influence the change for the benefit of ourselves, our families, our communities, and the world.
I'm processing.
Great.
Yeah. That being said, I wonder if you feel, and especially when interacting with children and with students of all ages, that they have been served, or they've been propositioned so many times certain images of the future, whether pessimistic, whether very techno heavy, whether I don't know, with different flavors. If something caught your attention that the generation today is pretty sure, because whatever reasons, whatever sources, they have already some I don't know, prejudgment about how the future will be. They don't have to be right images of the future, but pervasive and potent.
Yeah, the two images I think that come out, and should have been the answer to your first question, so I appreciate that, is that the most important, if not the only driver of change, is technology. Technology is extremely important, and I study it along. But we have, as you know, 5 or 6, depending on how you cut, sectors in society. Technology is the manipulation of the material world for our benefit, whether it's buildings or electrons or radio waves or whatever. There is a social world. There is an economic world. There is a political world and an environmental world. And we should be educating students that change is coming from those worlds as well, because most science fiction has high technology in it. So they're reading books and they're seeing movies, and it is a predominance of technology. I'm not going to discount technology is extremely important. It may even be the most important. Certainly in the history of the future, technology, did allow and start many social movements and a lot of social change. Our world today may be different from the last 200 or 300 years, largely because of technology. But there are other things that have changed, and we shouldn't just look at technology. The other is that the media, let's call it, it has a bias, and its purpose is they're a business. The purpose of a business is to serve customers and make money in the process. And in terms of the media, the service or the process of making money is to attract people. And we know now in cognitive science that there are chemicals in the brain that stimulate us, that give us pleasure, that draw our attention. And the media has figured out, in order to get us to pay attention to them and their advertisers, how to manipulate those chemicals. And that is because they will offer almost, not exclusively, but much more negative and sensational images than ordinary images. And in that sense, the young people and adults as well are being treated to a media environment that tends to emphasize the unusual, the new, the novel, and the potentially catastrophic rather than the potentially helpful or hopeful. Not to say that it's all one, it's not 100%, but the bias is there. So the fact that people are feeling alienated, the fact that people are feeling depressed and anxious about the future is to some extent a function of the media environment that it's very hard to escape. I mean, the industry of the media, beginning with broadcast television in the 1950s, this is not just social media. They had advertising, and there's a phrase in U.S. news reporting, local news says, if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, the news program at 6 o'clock at night in the 1950s and 60s on television, the car wreck, the accident, the fire, whatever, was always the first story to get people excited. So I would say that the over-reliance upon technology as a source of change and the over-reliance upon pessimistic images, both in media and in movies and science fiction, as a way of attracting people's attention in order so that they will also see the advertising that's paying for those media.
Which means that in a way, I assume you would connect what you said initially, that futures education and exercising those skills would also take a bit of this pressure from their shoulders, because they would be able to see it more in context, to see that they are sold some images and not others because it serves someone else's interest or whatever it sells, space time, airtime. It would prepare them to be a bit less impacted by these kind of threatening futures.
Knowing that's the influence on them. We're not going to change that influence. That influence will always be there. But knowing that it's there and saying, not treating the media as this is the truth about the future. This is a perspective on the future, which tends to be more negative. We're going to release a series of videos that are already produced. We're putting them together now. And one of them is called Optimism, Pessimism. It's an attempt to balance the hopeful aspects of the future with the negative aspects of the future. And it's absolutely necessary that we give students and tell them they are being treated to a pessimistic diet. Now, speaking of diet as a metaphor, we're being treated to lots of foods that are wonderful and very pleasurable and not particularly healthy. So we teach them, we hope, in health classes and nutrition classes to, eat the candy and eat the cake, but also eat the vegetables and the healthier stuff. It's not that we're going to prevent business from pushing sugar at us. They'll continue to do that because it stimulates our human desire to consume it, and that's what they want. But it's not a public service; it's a business. And when we think of it as a business, we realize that they have goals and needs, which are not wrong. I mean, it's the economy, it's a business economy. And so they figured out how to get our attention and how to get us to buy the sugary drinks and the other things which are fun off the grocery store shelf, but more of that than what may be healthier for us in the long run. It's the same process. Education is a way of giving us more awareness and sense of the world we're living in. And that world is full of media, which tends to be negative. It's full of foods and products, which tend to not be particularly healthy for us. And yet, and so knowing that doesn't change us. We still have those chemicals, we still have those desires, but it gives us an awareness of the ability to balance that. Well, so I'm going to do this now, and this is really fun, but most of the time I'm going to be a little bit better. That's education, and education should be teaching that stuff, and we're not.
I think there are two phenomena that can coexist, meaning on one hand, as you say, we are not equipping the young and even the older to have this heightened awareness of how change occurs, how we can impact it, and so on. This is on one hand. But on the other, as a society as a whole, and especially Western society, we are obsessed with the future and both its great potential and its threats, as you just mentioned. So as a society, we are almost fetishizing the future. I think one book author named it. And as you said at the beginning of the conversation, this started way back with the Industrial Revolution, then post-World War II with the arms race and the space race. Everything was racing to new spaces, literally and metaphorically. So we are a bit obsessed with occupying, in a way, the future, with dealing with it, with discerning through it, and then making it our own. And my next question is, if this create your future, own your future, it sounds democratic and it invites everyone to do so and to chip in. But does it also need a certain humbleness and caution with this view on let's own and create our future? What would be that kind of caution that you invite to?
People ask me when you do planning and trying to influence change, what are some of the characteristics? And I think humility, which is not a popular emotion or a popular concept in modern society. People who are successful do not seem to be humble. They seem to be certain. They seem to be driven. They seem to know that they are, that they have power and that they will use it. So those are our models, unfortunately. And so humility. And in futures, I believe we have a characteristic. We could have put humility on the futures consciousness scale. Those 5 dimensions are not the only dimensions. We basically say, we don't know. Give it up. You do not know. Now, when somebody proposes a new plan, they usually say, here's how we're going to do it, and here's why it's going to be successful. That's how you recruit people to the plan. And yet, at the same time, they should say, we don't know how this is going to go. So therefore, it's tentative. It's experimental. I draw the distinction between an itinerary when you're going to Brussels or you're going to New York and you have a plan and you have air tickets and you have transportation and you get your luggage and you carry all that stuff. That's different than an exploration. That's a journey of a fixed journey. And we think of the future as a fixed journey. We are exploring. This is like the people who entered unknown places, whether it's the steppes of Russia, whether it's the South American Amazon continent, whether it's the west of the US. They did not know what they were going to face. They did not have an itinerary. They didn't say, oh, here for a month from now, we're going to be at this place. They didn't even know that place existed. Exploring the future, particularly in a more complex and rapidly moving change, is more like exploration than it is like the traditional journeys on roads or airplanes or transportation or whatever. And an explorer has to kind of live day by day. What do we find today? Where are we? Where should we go? What's the next step? And they're making decisions, real-time decisions as they go along. Now, the very hyper commercialized, hyper management focus we have in our world today doesn't like that. What do you mean this is exploration? You got to have a budget. You got to have a schedule. You got to have, yes, but we've never done this before. We've never had the future of the 2020s, the rest of this decade. We don't know what's in facing us. Now, we know some things. We don't go so radically and say we don't know anything, but we don't know enough to be able to build a bridge in 2028. Because we don't know what the technology is at that time. We don't know what the social and the political environment is at that time. And so we have to be tentative and humble about what we know and say what we know. And yeah, there was a very interesting press conference in the United States in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. And a very noted physician who was in the government was being asked questions about the COVID crisis. What was, and the reporters were saying, how long is this going to last? And he said, I don't know. How many people are going to be? And he said, I don't know. When is it going to stop? And they kept asking them for exact answers, and he was strong enough and his values were such. I will tell you what I know when I know it, but if I don't know, I will not make it up. My gosh, that is something that we should be doing a lot more of in public life and in schools. We don't know. Let's figure it out. And that's what scientists do. Scientists start an experiment in you hope, in a somewhat humble version of, I don't know what nature is going to tell us at the end of this experiment. But do we do that in school? No, because what we're looking at is not that process, which is called scientific thinking. Scientific literacy is entering into a novel situation with an open mind, with some ideas, but not sure how it's going to go. That's the way we should be doing science. When you go to a science lab, what do you have? It's like a recipe. It's like a kitchen. You know, you're going to put these chemicals together and they're going to turn blue, and then you're going to do this, and they do that, and they follow it, and they get an A, and they go on to college. It's not scientific thinking. It's practicing the facts that scientists have come up with over the years, which are marvelous and wonderful. But the process by which they came up with it was a process of trial and error, trying to figure things out, a process that is steeped in uncertainty. Let's teach science like scientists do, rather than simply the facts of what they've come up with at the end.
The results of their work, yeah. So in a way, the metaphor is not own the future, but I mean, it's exploration versus conquering in a way. Maybe exploration is a better metaphor than conquering.
Yeah, right. Domination. I mean, we have this unfortunate cultural prescription that we are the most important thing in nature, in the world, and that nature is there for us to use, not to work with. That's another metaphor. Is it we are in charge. And in the Bible told us that, and those of us who grew up in religion and Christian religion heard that, and we learned that. And okay, nature is here for us to use, and it's a misplaced metaphor.
Indeed. Now, Peter, as we're approaching our last minutes, I would invite you to, if you want, and if you have on top of your head some of the programs or activities that you are now fully promoting at Teach the Future that either children or adolescents or young adults could be interested in. And maybe this is an opportunity for them to find out about your work across the world.
Our major project, my major project right now on the education side, is to answer the question of a school or a teacher who says, I'd like to teach the future, what should I do? We have very few people asking that still, but there are some, and I need to have a better answer. Up till now, given the humility, given the fact that I didn't know exactly, I couldn't prescribe a curriculum. We're getting a little bit more experience and developing the materials. We have books, workbooks that students can use. We call one the Futures Thinking Playbook, which is a middle school process of developing scenarios. And we have another book for high school students. We have a series of learning objectives. We have a library of educational materials, and we are developing this 10 or 12 part video series, 5 to 7 minutes videos, very short, very specific, with activities. If we get those into classrooms, and this should be very easy to do, teachers will either buy them or find them somehow. We haven't decided all that yet. And they show them to the students, and they have the discussions. And this optimism, pessimism is one of those. It's the second one, actually, because I wanted them to have a platform to be able to discuss their views of the future, and if they are anxious, and if they're afraid, or if that we can't solve those problems, but we can have some influence on them. So those are the materials. teachthefuture.org is our website, and we'd be delighted to discuss with any teacher or any school. There is an ecosystem, we'll call it an ecosystem, and a movement to include young people in futures these days. The UN is involved in that, a number of NGOs. We're the organization, however, that has chosen the hardest goal, and that is to bring it to the young people in their schools, in their classes. That's where they live. That's what their job is. From 6 years old to 22 years old, they're basically going to school. Why don't we have now having them in fairs and webinars and extracurricular activities? Is all wonderful. I'm not saying not, but we really need to get it in schools if we want to change the culture, if we want people to think about the future with the kind of humility and the kind of flexibility that we're talking about, rather than the kind of rigid empirical way and fact-based way in which we're doing education. We have to get it into classes.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was wonderful to have you.
I love talking about all these things. Good luck on the rest of your podcast. I look forward to seeing future ones.